Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us from around the world, and welcome to this session of Innovation 2020. For some of you, this might be your first session of the event, so just to set the context, all the sessions in Innovation 2020 are designed to bring together civil servants from different departments, different professions, different countries, to talk about innovation, to talk about the great innovation that's already going on, to identify maybe some of the barriers and challenges to innovation, and hopefully to come up with some of the enablers or the solutions to overcoming those obstacles. I'm Siobhan Benita. I was a former UK civil servant, and I am going to help steer us through all of the panel sessions today. And the panel that we are about to kick off with now is looking at the issue of data management and data sharing. And good data management and data sharing is key to so many innovative projects, whether it's through permitting cross-departmental services built around user needs or enabling evidence-based policymaking and service delivery. The challenges here are partly technical and organisational, but some countries also face barriers around legislation and public perception, issues like trust. So as well as considering the systems, the protocols and regulatory structures required to support secure and effective use of data across government, this panel will also examine different approaches to winning over public confidence and public trust. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our brilliant 5 panel members, and I will be putting questions to them, and then we'll have a bit of a panel discussion. But if you're joining us now as a member of the audience, you can also submit questions, and if we've got time left at the end, then we will try to answer as many of those questions as we can. So please do submit your questions while you're listening to the panel discussion right now. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our brilliant panelists. We have Julie Pearce. Julie Pearce is Director of Openness, Data and Digital at the Food Standards Agency in the United Kingdom. And Julie was actually chair of a workshop that we had yesterday on building public confidence and consent for data sharing. And that was an interdisciplinary workshop, so with officials from lots of different professions. Then we have Shahar Bracha, who's acting CEO, Government ICT Authority, the National Digital Ministry in Israel. And Shahar also chaired a workshop yesterday, but that was aimed at policy, operational delivery and research professionals. So it'd be interesting to get feedback from what was discussed there as well. Then we have Mireille Laroche, who's Assistant Commissioner for Service, Innovation and Integration, Chief Data Officer and Chief Service Officer at the Canada Revenue Agency. And Mireille chaired the workshop for finance, tax, fraud, error and debt professionals yesterday. So we'll also have that perspective coming in. Then we have Eileen Fuchs, who's Principal and Head of Division, Digital Policy, Federal Ministry of the Interior in Germany. And Eileen was chair of the workshop for officials who work in digital, data, technology, knowledge, information management and statistics. So a broad group of professionals there yesterday as well. And last but not least, we have Sue Bateman, who's Interim Director for Digital, Data and Technology Functional Strategy at the Government Digital Service here in the United Kingdom. While Sue didn't chair a workshop yesterday, Sue brings a wealth of experience with her, so we'll be drawing on the things that she already knows about that are going on here in the UK. So I'm going to kick off with a question to each of the panelists, a slightly different question to each of the panel members because it draws on what they did yesterday or their own experiences. So Julie, I'm going to come to you first, and I'm going to ask, based on what you heard yesterday, how could better public sector sharing of data improve our ability to address the pandemic? And how is the pandemic affecting civil service and public attitudes to data sharing? So this has come up quite a lot. Julie, over to you.
Thank you very much. In our discussion, we considered the pandemic situation against a wider backdrop of needs to share data more generally, and feeling that was growing over time. But certainly in the pandemic, we reflected how we had to respond very quickly to an emerging situation. And one example that we thought was good because of its speed of delivery, its need, and the way that we linked departments up together was our response to vulnerable people, those people who are shielding or economically vulnerable who needed access to food. So how do you find those people? How do you reach out to them and connect to them? And how do you ensure that what they need is delivered to them? So that's a great example of where we did that, but it was really hard. All we were trying to find, in actual fact, was very simple contact details for those people, understanding who is in what category and how do I connect with them. But it proved to be really hard to find the data and to make sure that it was accurate and up to date, even when all eyes were on us to try to make it happen.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. We'll come back on that issue of being hard because we'll talk about some of the obstacles and how maybe we can overcome them. Shahar, I'm going to ask you a very similar question then. So in your workshop yesterday, how do you think the officials that were there that are having your discussion, how do you think they wanted to see better innovation in the use and management of data?
Well, thank you for having me. I think one of the main points that was gathered yesterday, first of all, is all the governments have the same issues and the same problems, and this sort of talks goes a long way about the solution. I think one of the main issues regarding the data and regarding the threats that we have today is about privacy and about how do you share it in a proactive or in a manner that protect the information that we have on our citizens, especially as government employee. The information is much more private as it gets. I think maybe health information is just much more greater than that. One of the main points that we talk about is about how do you create value from the data. Being a government agency and pushing the data outwards costs a lot of money. We need to protect it. We need to cleanse it maybe. And we don't really assess the impact that it caused on the market. So we need to create some sort of an ecosystem with the private sector to create value to this data, and maybe in some sort of like an open source application. You can get it for free, but if you generate any revenue from it, you can have to bring it back. We talked about a couple of frameworks like that. And in a final note, we understand that data in the current state is very, very in initial stages. It's very new, even though we have data for many years. The massive amount of data being gathered and the openness and the usageness of it is very new field for all of us.
Brilliant, thank you. So lots that we can come back on there, especially that idea of generating value because it is costly. But you, at the same time, you want as many people as possible to be able to access and make use of that data. Mireille, I'm going to ask you a very similar question then to kick off. So how did your group feel like they wanted to innovate? So these were the people, finance, tax, debt professionals. How did they feel that they wanted to innovate in management and use of data?
So good morning to all, and thank you for having me. I'd like to give kudos to the members of my workshop today. Yesterday we had a really good conversation. I would say that there was 3 dimensions that were kind of talked about in length. The first one was data integration. The people that were involved in the workshop were very much associated with compliance activities, but also providing benefits to their citizens, and mostly vulnerable populations. So there was a lot of conversation about how do you actually integrate data that governments hold in order to better serve Canadians, in my part, but citizens in a timely fashion. And the impediments that we have in that regard. So certainly that was one dimension that was talked about. So within government, but also outside government, how do we actually couple information that we have with third-party data to have a better overall portrait of the situation to make better decision? The second element was in terms of data quality. So to what extent do we have the right data? It's not because government collects data that we're actually collecting the right things. Systems have been put in place years ago for very different reasons. And the need for data has evolved tremendously in recent years. So how do we make sure that we have the right data and that it's clean and properly kind of formatted for use? The third element that was discussed was in terms of how do we actually improve timeliness. And this is kind of touch about what Julie was talking about in relation to COVID. But I think everybody felt during recent months the need to provide very timely information and based on new data. Many countries put forward new benefits to support their citizens or businesses. And how do you actually turn yourself and be agile enough to be able to collect that information, analyze it, and feed it back to decision makers to make sure that whatever you've put in place is actually working, and if there are needs to be for changes that we have the information to do that. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So again, 3 things we can pick up on there. So the quality of data, timeliness of data, and the kind of the right connections, linking it up to other data sources as well. Eileen, I'm going to come over to you with a slightly different question from your workshop, which is, what did the people in your workshop think could be achieved if data was shared more, both within the organisation and across different organisations as well?
Yeah, thanks for being on the panel here today. For the first time at GGF, and I enjoyed it. Really good workshop yesterday we had. Although time went really fast and there were so many ideas raised in the breakouts, but we did have a live poll at the beginning, and it was really pretty clear that for most of the participants, the benefits of data sharing and better data management were clear in a sense that they could achieve more working together within government, especially in a data-driven economy, especially in the times of a pandemic, and also with a view to the citizens and business who need to profit from data. So that was really something that was shared overall view. However, how to get there and if this goal meets reality, that was something that was pretty intensely discussed, I think. And that's actually where the professions that were present, which are knowledge management professionals from the UK, but also from abroad, had very, very specific input and very specific ideas. And I think also we're faced with a vast topic to discuss because data comes in so many forms, and there are so many barriers. You talk about legal barriers, there are factual barriers, there are organizational barriers, and there are cultural barriers. So I think there was overall the shared view that we would have very much to gain from better data sharing and management. But then when it comes to the practical aspects of it, it's actually very nitty-gritty when we get to the details. So.
Great, thank you, Eileen. So again, we will come back on to some of those. So the benefits being clear so people can see the benefits, but again, they're very conscious that there are these barriers in place. And as you say there, they could be legal, they could be organizational, they could be cultural, but they're getting in the way of us doing better in this area. So Sue, I'm going to come to you, and this is largely pulling on your own experience. I can't ask you what your workshop officials discussed yesterday, but I can ask you what you think the greatest opportunities are for innovation in government if we manage to use, manage and share data more effectively.
Great, thank you. And hello, everybody. And it was really interesting, actually, to hear what's come up in discussion from those various workshops yesterday, because actually I think they really chime with what I wanted to say around the question, which is, I guess, if we lift it up to the vision that we have around how we want to make better use of data, and I see data very much as an enabler for us to think about how we do deliver that vision on joined up, trusted public services, policies and research and statistics that are better informed by timely, accurate access to data. And I think it's interesting that some of the panels have drawn on COVID and the recent experiences globally of the response to that, because I would say that has been really a point where we've just seen how important effective data access and data management is. And we've seen in the UK a real coming together across government, the wider public sector, and with industry and academic partners, where there is a common purpose. that sharing of data to deliver, as Julie highlighted, support for clinically extremely vulnerable and other vulnerable groups, delivering food, supermarket delivery slots, and other kind of support. And that's the same globally. And I think what that brings us back to really then is, if this is a point in time where we can see what is possible, then one of the things that we're thinking about from a UK perspective is, how do we build on that step change so that it isn't just a moment in time, but it is something that starts to become the norm really. And I guess some of the things that other panelists have mentioned already are in our minds around the barriers. But if I'm kind of focusing as a last point on the opportunities, for me, it is around that ability to join up whilst bringing citizens along with us in a trusted way. And I guess I would see the opportunity is really being about responsible innovation, so using data in a way that enables us to do more, to deliver better services, but also one that maintains trust amongst our citizens and also amongst our colleagues.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sue. So I'm going to come back on some of those points now, but just a reminder as well to anybody who's watching, to all the people who are watching, please do, if you have any questions at all, you've got great experts here who know their stuff. If you've got a burning question about data management, data sharing, then now is your chance to put it to the panel, and we will pick that up at the end. But I wanted to delve a bit deeper into, because there's so many themes that are emerging here that I think will emerge from other panels as well, about some of the obstacles. So whether that's collaboration across organisations and across departments, or a better understanding between professions of what maybe those different professions need. The cost of sharing data was mentioned there as well. And also I want to throw in, because I think it's something that's really topical, certainly in the UK at the moment, which is a kind of mistrust potentially from the public about sharing data, whether that's data that they own being shared or data that the government owns about them being shared. And we've seen that, I think, in COVID and some of the things around the app and things like that, their health app. So I just want to go to each panel member in turn and think, what do they see as being kind of the biggest barriers in this area? What do they think are the ones that are the most stubborn obstacles that we should tackle first? I'm going to change the order slightly so that everyone gets a fair share. Let me start with Shahar this time.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll focus on three main points. Of course, there are many. One, the first and foremost is, I think, it's skills. It's the human factor. Civil servants and managers don't really know what to ask, what to do with the data. They don't really know how to read the data. And once you don't have the necessity, then you don't create the solution. So this is one obstacle. The second main issue on my part is the lack of tools. Even though you may want, you know what you want, you find it hard to get the right answer. You don't necessarily have the right tools. You don't have necessarily the right personnel to do it. It's also some sort of a tool per se. And also one really true, a global truth about that is the government procurement or public sector procurement is really hard across the world. So tools and procuring tools needs to get dealt with centrally. And you touched the final note is fear. It's fear from the public. Scandals such as Cambridge Analytica and what Facebook are doing or not doing with our data creates the assumptions surrounding the public that if we were to start analyzing their personal data, even for COVID and for the pandemic, it's some sort of a threat to them and to their privacy. And we need to tackle those three main points on my end.
Thanks, Shahar. That's great. Mireille, I'm going to ask you the same question. So are there other obstacles that you think are particularly difficult to overcome?
Thank you very much. I'll start with what I call the infrastructure. So the fact that, as we're trying to use data as a corporate asset in all of our organization, we don't necessarily have the necessary systems and processes in place to be able to do so. And so, as I mentioned before, at times we are not collecting the right data, and at times as well, we're not actually connecting the data. So, for example, as a client for a given department, I may be in 25 systems that are not talking to each other. So as you're trying to deliver good services, it's really hard for any agents to have a full view of who I am and what do I need. So that for me is a major impediment. It's something that we see in my own organization. The other thing is that right now, because of that lack of integration and that we're not necessarily seeking the right data, we're kind of relying on approaches that are kind of subpar or fragile in themselves. So, as part of the workshop, someone was mentioning how they use qualitative data, so word of mouth, their networks, to be able to get a sense of what's happening in the field and to get the pulse and the priorities, which in itself is good, but it's very much dependent on who you talk to, who's in place, their willingness to share. And so to what extent are we kind of basing our information on things that could, that our sources can kind of disappear? Last thing that I'll talk about is really about culture. And so you've mentioned it, Siobhan, in your earlier on, but the culture of data, and that speaks to training, that speaks to tool, that speaks to mindset. And I will kind of bring kind of two dimensions to it. The first one being really a question of ownership within organization of data. Often enough, as people are responsible for data, they think it's their own data, and they have not always a willingness to share and to see, even within an organization, to kind of share it for broader use because they fear of losing the control of the data and what does it mean and how it's going to be used. And then the second element is really agility. How do we actually foster a culture of agility to be able to turn around, to kind of use data in a very timely fashion to be able to make decision and to be able to change our collection methods, change our collection approach, just to kind of seek what we need to be able to inform our decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, that's great. So far we've got infrastructure, the right tools, culture, who owns the data, and agility. This is going to get harder and harder as I come to each of you in the panel to talk about the obstacles, but I'm going to go to Sue now. Sue, are there other obstacles that you can see that are particularly getting in the way?
Yes, and I think, I always agree with everything that's been said so far. So rather than repeat, we've just, in September actually, we've just published the UK National Data Strategy, and it's out for consultation. And there's a key bit of that strategy, I think it's mission 3, that talks about the barriers, but also the areas of focus that we see around government making better use of data. And I think some of the things that we haven't been covered so far that I'd kind of point out are around leadership. So around kind of the decision making and having data literate informed decision makers across the public sector. Trust and ethics are really important as we and recognising the importance of transparency around what we're doing in government. And then finally, one of the other areas that I'd pull out is around for us around the standards and enforcement bit of the piece. So not just having kind of policies that are seen as a nice to have, but recognising across government and the wider public sector in our case, where we might need to start to coalesce more strongly around particular standards.
Great, thank you. So that's really interesting, bringing in the kind of leadership and maybe the need for enforcement as well, bringing in a couple of new angles there. Eileen, I'm going to ask if you've got anything before, we are going to move on to solutions in a minute, but we've still got Eileen and Julie to talk about if there are any other obstacles that were identified in their workshops or from their own experience. Eileen, I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, thanks. Much of it was addressed, like what was discussed in my workshop or the workshop I was chairing. Infrastructure, quality of data, skills in handling data, then leadership. You need a top-down approach that was clearly stated as something that needed to be implemented within government and within the organizations within government as a long-standing policy that will survive changes in political leadership, and that will be addressed constantly and lived up to. So that's definitely culture-wise something that needs to be taken care of, I think, and at the moment is apparently an obstacle in many governments or government organization. But I think one thing that came out quite clearly is the legal dimension, perhaps. So the legal categories of data, classified data, personal data, privacy concerns, GDPR. So we do have a kind of, I would say, hesitance when it comes to sharing data, because many officials are not sure, can I really share this? It might be related to privacy and concerns, and really important information is often classified and cannot be really shared. So adding to everything that was said before, I think the legal component, and with it comes also the cultural attitude towards data. So from need to know, which comes from classified and privacy concerns, to need to share. How do we manage to bridge that gap? And it's also
Brilliant.
related to legal.
So adding
questions.
on there the legal dimensions and maybe the categories and people maybe not being quite clear on what they can and can't share as well. Julie, I've given you on this one the difficult task of coming last when it comes to, are there any other obstacles that you think are particularly difficult in this agenda?
Yes, thank you. I agree with everything that's already been said, but maybe to sort of build on the conversation, sometimes having conversations about sharing data, people sort of naturally go to the technology and say it's a technical problem. So yes, there are lots of technical problems in there, but I don't think that that's sort of like the fundamental one. I think they are relatively easy to get over, and the challenges are more in the space of data quality, but that's a reflection of data standards, if there are any standards that have been implemented. And just understanding data standards is a big topic in its own right, particularly when you start thinking about metadata. What's the data purpose? Can I just simply reuse something that looks to be the same? Can I reuse it over here for a different purpose? So that starts to bring in quite a complex discussion, and then I'll sort of loop round that I do think there is a need for education for us as civil servants to understand all of that, but also to understand the art of the possible. Things in many ways are becoming easier. Some of the technologies are allowing you to anonymize data more easily. Some of the AI tools are becoming suddenly more affordable. I'm looking at distributed ledger technology and what we can do without going away and building gigantic data warehouses. So there is a lot that's going on, but it's a fast moving area. So again, any sort of educational training needs to reflect that. It's always moving.
Brilliant. Thanks, Julie. You've nicely kind of started to transition us there into kind of the final section, I think, of this discussion. So what we've had there is the list of the obstacles, maybe the challenges, and you can see it's quite, there's a lot to overcome here when it talks about infrastructure, tools, the culture, people maybe not understanding this enough to know what they can share or what data they can reuse in different ways. But on the other hand, there are huge benefits if we can get this right in terms of improving, in particular, our services for the public. So I want to kind of move into a final round, really, of thoughts from all of you, which is, if you could say, what's the kind of one or two things that you would really like to see changed, whether that's on a government level or whether that's within your profession, to actually make data management and data sharing better and more effective. And also, I like the fact that a lot of you mentioned COVID as a kind of a situation that's forced innovation, forced people to do things differently. So maybe when you're talking about this, are there any examples of good practice that you could also touch on, whether that's things you've seen happen because of the pandemic, or just things you know are going on in your country or in your department or in your profession? So what are the good examples of good practice, and what are the things that you would like to see most change? So the enablers you would like to see put in place. I'm going to come to Shahar to answer this one first.
Thank you. I think, first of all, with every major change, there is a necessity, a sense of urgency, someone who needs the change that you are moving forward. And I think COVID-19, the pandemic, created this change in sense of urgency. The public is now demanding governments to put out or to deliver information that reflects or the underline of their decisions. So the demand for data is there, and of course we're living in a data age. The demand from the public sector, from the private sector is there as well. I think a couple of points about what we need to change and what we're doing in our perspective in Israel. First and foremost is the education. We need to create some sort of a program to educate people about what is possible with information, as was said before, and we need to create more easy usage of tools, especially regarding advanced tools such as AI and ML, to really achieve what we want or what we assess we can achieve from data, and not things that we can do today with simple spreadsheets or BI applications. And in the center of this, we need the standards. We need the framework about how we do it. Standards on one hand, how do you build your data and how do you share it? And the legal framework, how do you keep it anonymized? How do you keep it private? How do you keep the ownership of the data even after you deliver it to the outside, especially to the private sector? I would like to share with you a couple of things that we are doing in Israel. The government has decided on two government resolutions. One is the establishment of a national data lake, a government data lake that will have all of the information in the National Bureau. And the major point there is all of the information will be delivered in private manners and private standards to researchers, and of course researchers from within the government to policymakers, so they can assess their changes. The second major point is another government resolution about the creation of standards of unified model of the main data entities in the government. So the sharing, the cross-government sharing will be much more easier, and the data will be much more cleanser. So we won't have to every time work very hard on integrating the different points of different data sets, and also when we are publishing the information, the private sector won't need to invest much time and effort. The final note is we need some sort of a North Star, some sort of a strategy so we can look forward many years ago. So we are currently finishing, hopefully in the next couple of months, a national public sector strategy. Will oversee all of the points, the human factors, the tools, the procurement, the ethics, and much more in a massive program or strategy, and will follow it for the many years to come, so we can assess our progress to this end goal.
Ask you the same question. It's great to hear there from Shahar about the infrastructure that Israel is putting in place. So Eileen, your thoughts on enabling factors and some great examples you might have come across.
Yeah, well, perhaps I will just present you with what the workshop group came up with, because I think that's most interesting, reflecting what the participants thought. So legislation-wise, it was said that actually what was needed was a citizen-centric approach when generating and processing data, also legally. So when you're drafting new legislation on data, that needs to be borne in mind. Also, as is done in the UK now, create a chief data officer in government, in major government organizations, and one chief government CDO on top, which implement the data culture and set standards, procedures when it comes to quality of data. Also, then they said technically, a consolidation of government IT infrastructure and services was needed. For example, for Germany, we are doing this. We're in the process of consolidating the IT infrastructures and services of our federal government. And it's a major job, which has been ongoing for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's still not finished. So you can see in big countries with big administrations, it is definitely not done in a wink of an eye, even if it's badly needed. And then culture-wise, the group came up with that a data policy needed to be adopted for a number of years, and irrespective of changes in leadership. And that data literacy skills for every employee in government should be made mandatory. And I think that is definitely the way to go. For example, in Germany, we are now establishing, or in the process of establishing, a digital academy for federal government employees. And of course, it needs to be graded, so you need to have different grades, and depending on the function of digital skills needed. But there definitely should be a basic course that will actually allow you to assess data and put you in a position to handle data properly. And also establish this need to share culture, which I was talking about before. So, and in addition to that, and I think that's an important point too, that the data literacy profession per se should be strengthened, and that more positions for data scientists and analysts should be created within government. I think that's also something that is very, very badly needed in many government authorities. So you have experts who you can refer to, or experts who will actually think about how could I make use of the data that we produce, and how can the public benefit from it. For example, in our Federal Statistical Office in Germany is now producing a dashboard for data, which will go online soon, which assembles all kind of COVID relevant data, not specifically health data, but the data that is dependent on how the pandemic it will evolve. So I think, or how it will run. So I think those are perhaps some examples and some ways to go forward, and solutions that might be thought about.
So really good to see the feedback about the citizen-centric approach, and also to hear again about a country doing the kind of at the strategic level. So the idea of the data literacy skills and the digital academy, I really like that. Just before I come to the last 3 panel members to give their thoughts on enabling and good examples, I want to also add in a question that's come in from a member of the public who are watching. This is from Annette Toft, and she says, what role could a strong vision have? Not just a strategy for the delivery of objectives, but it feels like we are missing a strong overarching vision in the UK, like they have in Singapore and elsewhere. So maybe when I come to the last 3 panel members, you might give your thoughts as well on whether a vision could be one of those enabling factors that might help as well. So I'm going to ask Mireille for your thoughts on good examples and enabling factors.
Okay, well, thank you. Just to jump on the issue of having a vision, this is actually something in my organization that we've recently done. So to really develop a vision with principles in terms of where we wanted to go with respect to data, to be really able to kind of put it in words what it means to think about data and information as a corporate asset. So from my perspective, and when I think about the Canadian government as a whole, we're actually doing, I think, a pretty good job in terms of really kind of putting data at the forefront. We don't really have a pan-Canadian kind of vision, but we do have some very directives and instruments that are being leveraged to be really pushing the use of data for kind of advancing AI, digital, but also service to Canadians. I was thinking of kind of answering the question put in place just in terms from a COVID perspective, and how we, some of the things that were actually raised in the workshop. I do think that COVID is going to be a catalyst. It kind of is creating opportunities on the data front that we need to leverage. In a certain way, it highlighted some of the issues that we have And because we were faced with a real life situation where we needed to act quickly, and there's nothing like an urgency to kind of get people mobilized. But I think for those responsible for data, we really need to seize that opportunity to kind of push through and make sure that we put in place the infrastructure and the practices in place so that it actually something changes. Just in terms of from our perspective, one of the things that came up is really the need of data for service delivery purposes. So thinking about changing our service delivery as everybody had to go home, work from home. In an organization like mine, we still had a lot of paper processes. So while we were able, when COVID hit in March, we were in our filing season. So people were actually, filling out their tax returns. And fortunately, we have a really high percentage of people who actually are doing it electronically. But there's still about 10% who do it on paper. So, and then we had nobody in the offices to actually treat those. So how do you actually make sure that you kind of move on, and it's all based on data. How do you actually going to be able to kind of move your processes? Tax filing is one of them, but we have many within our organization to be able to have the data to provide digital services that are going to be used by your citizens. So that for me really puts an emphasis on good quality data and on the ability to use it to be able to change how you actually are delivering your services. And I think too, the other element that is in terms of an enabling is really the opportunity to be looking at different ways of conducting your business. I think everybody is kind of facing that and thinking about how do we are kind of doing our business, and at the foundation of that is data. So how are we going to set up ourselves to be able to kind of deliver on this kind of new opportunity that we're facing? In respect to that too, we have to counterbalance this in terms of and making sure that we have the right balances between pushing forward on these types of issues while respecting privacies. There was Eileen talked a lot about legislation. How are we facilitating her comments about need to know versus sharing of information really resonated with me. We're facing that in my organization. But how do you find the balance? But also there's the notion of security. And as you are collecting this information and you're providing such vast amounts of money to your citizens, to support them, that incites certain people with bad intentions to come and to, kind of hack your data to be able to, get their own money. And so it's that fine balance that we have to kind of walk in terms of, how do you actually use the data for, to advance your kind of mandate, while in the sense kind of balancing the privacy considerations which are very, very much present in Canada and elsewhere, and also the security dimension of things. So thank you.
Much. I love the fact that you focus there on, ultimately the benefits are about data to improve public services. That's what this is all about, and to make people's lives better. So it's absolutely worth focusing on how we do that and making sure that we get these obstacles out of the way. So I'm going to come to Sue next, and then after that I will come to Julie to talk about some good examples and some of those enablers. Sue, over to you.
So it's great to follow on from Mireille, because I think a lot of this is around, we absolutely have to see the past year as an opportunity, and understanding where the gaps are that we need to focus on. So for me, this is around, I guess, fixing what I would describe as foundational elements like the quality, the standards, the legislation, and some of the culture. But one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was around and how do we continue to innovate whilst we are fixing those foundational things? Because we all know, I think, in the roles that we do, that the world of technology and is moving at a fast pace, and things that we might have thought difficult or inconceivable just a few years ago are now possible because of the progression in technology. And so I'd just highlight the work that we're doing through the GovTech Catalyst Challenge. It's a 3-year programme that we've been running across the UK public sector, where we're trying to support organisations of all kinds of sizes, local government, blue light services, central government, to help them to take advantage of the opportunities that data and emerging technology presents, and working with suppliers from industry, again, of all kinds of sizes. And that's been a really interesting exercise for us. We're into the final year of this phase of the programme. And it's been interesting because it's been an eye-opener around some of the other things that we need to do, I guess, beyond fixing the data, really, into that capability question, helping with things like understanding and managing risks and having an appetite to experiment within clear kind of parameters and framework, understanding the benefits that a truly multidisciplinary team can bring to kind of working on a challenge together. And I guess then, if we're thinking about what do we need to see if we're going to have data management and innovation go hand in hand, there's something back again to kind of leaders, probably into the procurement commercial space as much as kind of business decision makers, around that a little bit of license to fail fast and fail quickly, whilst making sure that we've got all the proper safeguards in place. And I think there's a real role here for digital and data professionals to be helping to bring to life what is possible through all the use cases that we're seeing, not just through COVID or examples like the GovTech Catalyst that we have in the UK, but demonstrating the power and the possibility of data in the delivery of a real life service.
And the possibility of data, that's such a good phrase. Julie, I'm going to come to you for the last couple of minutes on kind of good examples and enablers in data management, data sharing.
Thank you very much. And first, I'd like to go back to the question that was posed about a vision. Yes, I absolutely agree. I think the vision is really important. It's critical. We have a vision for data within the FSA. We created that a few years ago. But from it, we learned that we needed to do some other things as well. There was no point in having the vision. We actually needed to make it real and make it happen. So as we took the vision forward and started to implement, we realized that the only way that we could engage people was through the creation of data stories. There was no point in talking about we built this system and it delivers this thing or it delivers this report or this insight. We had to write real stories around how our customers, in this case, consumers of the UK food system, people who eat our food and need to eat it safely, how were they being benefited? So really making it real. The second thing for making it real was, rather than having it as a bolt-on and something just my team created, it has now become absolutely core to our overall business strategy, the FSA's overall business strategy. It's one of the three pillars for us going forward. And in doing that, we get it woven into absolutely everything that we do and how we do it. And it goes right to the top of the organisation, as well as it being cascaded all the way down. So that, I think, I could put up as good practice, but we learnt it the hard way. Just one other thing that we've also learnt more recently is around ethics and standards, understanding and engaging with what we're doing with data to make sure that we're doing the right thing with it, and to make sure that we can explicitly talk about the value, but talk also about how it's the right data being used for the right purpose, and trying, I hope, going forward, not only making data part of a wider public debate, but also making the algorithms, what we do with it, and how we act on it, making that part of the wider debate, and having transparency of algorithms as well as transparency of data.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at the clock and I can't believe how fast the time has gone to the end of the session, but that's testimony to the brilliant 5 panel members that we've had. So a huge thank you from me to all of you for sharing your own insights and also feedback from the sessions yesterday. Data management has been such an important issue for a long time. I think the pandemic's just heightened awareness of that, and it's really good to hear some of the great examples that are already going on in your organisations and the countries and the professions that you're from. Thank you to everybody who's been watching. Thanks again to the panel, and I'll see you soon in another panel this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.